Hello, podcast listeners. This is your host with the most. And guess what? We're going to do something daring in this episode. We're going to talk about other podcasts you might enjoy. So sit back, relax, grab a pen and paper, and hit the subscribe button, baby. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
Tucker, you know how it's great that we have this podcast and it's been over 250 episodes?
Oh,
and
I'm well aware.
Right? Like, it's awesome. And like,
love it.
It's cool that we have listeners who come every single week, but I'm going to do something a little daring this week. And I want to talk about the podcasts that you and I are listening to or have loved over the years.
Love it. This is actually the most, the question I get the most when people find out that I like doing podcasts. They go, what do you listen to?
Right.
This is a great idea.
I know. I've been thinking about this for a while, and my podcast listenership has been up recently. So I took a whole week off of work at the beginning of this last month, and I delved like head first into the podcast pool and asked other people for their opinion and stuff they're listening to. Now I'm going to tell you this much. A quality audio podcast is tough to find in some circumstances.
Right.
So the equipment has never been easier to use. You don't need any expertise. You can get, heck, your dad has a podcast that sounds good that's up and running.
And you don't need to break the bank to do it either. Right.
And so that means more people are making podcasts. Now, the downside of that is I found like 3 or 4 podcasts I loved that ended after episode like 5.
Right. And that was something that we were very intentional about early on, which was why we were doing 2 episodes a week, was like, we really want to get past a number that shows people, and a consistency that shows people that, no, we're trying to do this for the long haul. This isn't going to experience pod death, which most of them experience. I don't know what the number is, but I want to say it's in the 80 percentile range that podcasts that start are, dead within 3 months.
Yeah. Longevity is not something amateur podcasters deal with. And I also think there are plenty of corporations who jumped on like, well, we got to have a podcast.
Right.
And then they realize like after 6 episodes, they're like, geez, Gene from accounting is just the worst.
Hold on one second. There we go. I think part of it is it's unless you've been working in production like you and I have since we were in high school, it's really difficult to understand exactly the level of work that goes into something that sounds incredibly simple, like just talking into a microphone and then putting it out for people. And not even that. It's not necessarily that the tasks themselves are so difficult that you have to be a scientist to do them, but it's the consistency of doing it week after week. There have been so many times that Jage and I have walked into the studio or logged into Zencastr, and one of us or both of us were clearly not in the mood to do it, but we did it anyways because that's part of it.
Right. And it's holding ourselves accountable, which is awesome. And so most of the podcasts I'm going to talk about today are people who've done the same thing, who continue to produce. Now, there might be long legs between seasons. So, for example, I'm going to start with, can you guess what podcast I'm going to start with?
I was going to say Hardcore History.
No.
Because he only puts out like 2 episodes a year, but those episodes are like 8 hours long.
I know, and they're great, right? They're fantastic. No, I'm going to start with the Tobolowski files.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Stephen Tobolowski is a character actor who's actually been to Fargo. I was part of the crew that brought him to Fargo, and I got to meet him and tell him how much I loved his podcast. So here's what I like about Stephen Tobolowski. If you've ever seen Groundhog Day, he's the insurance salesman who runs up to Bill Murray on the street. You've seen him in a million things, everything from Spaceballs to Groundhog Day to Wild Hogs to Sneakers. I mean, Garfield 2, Tale of Two Kitties. He has been in just more movies than you can imagine. And he's been a bit player. He's been a lead. He's also done a lot of stage stuff, but his life is incredible. So one of my favorite stories to come out of a recent episode is he talked about going to visit his friend Jim McClure, who he studied acting with. And Jim was auditioning in New York to be on plays on Broadway, and he was dating this crazy redheaded gal. And so Steven he goes, I had like a $3 bottle of wine, and we went over to Jim's apartment, and I was meeting this woman, and I said, hi, like, I'm Steven. And she's like, hi. And he says, well, are you an actress? She's like, yeah, I'm about to do a sci-fi movie. And he's like, ooh, sci-fi, because this is back like in the 70s when sci-fi was not what it is today, certainly. And he goes, well, what's it about? And she's like, well, it's about like these kind of like mercenaries, and an alien gets on their ship, and of course he was talking to Sigourney Weaver, right? Like, that's the thing, is like, he's got all of these chance encounters in his life that have led up to these amazing moments. And it's not like he sits there and he says like, oh, here's a story from my life. He writes it out completely before he reads it. So good. And it's also one of those podcasts that reward the frequent listener. So you could pick up anywhere and have a wonderful listen. It doesn't matter. And he's, I think, at 90 plus episodes now. Nice. And they're usually about an hour and a half long a piece. But if you've listened from episode 1, you now know the like timeline of his life. So when he talks and references like a certain moment, you go like, oh yeah. And even the things that are not Hollywood related that Stephen Tobolowski talks about are fascinating. Like, he talks about how religion, was played a part in his life, and growing up in Texas. And he has a story about a couple of like local kids, and that the fact that their house was one of the last or one of the first homes built in a new track. So there was still like a stream with woods behind their house. And so they would go, and they were trying to capture all of these things like a water moccasin, so they could have the Dangerous Animals Club. And what's unique about the Tobolowski files is he's done some of them live. He's done some of them taped for a theatrical film. And he's even written books afterwards. So the Dangerous Animals Club and a couple other stories became a book for him. And it is just such an easy read, and it's such a fun read that if you love Hollywood, if you like, stories of making movies, this is great. If you like stories of just the human condition and how a jalapeno pizza and a tornado can affect someone's life, this is the podcast for you. And I feel like it was also one of the first podcasts of its kind in the style it was, which was like talking about like an autobiographical sort of look. So, and he's an extremely smart man and extremely funny.
How often does he put out episodes?
So they do it season by season. Okay. And so sometimes there's long gaps between the season, but like I said, you've got 90 episodes, you've got well over 150 hours worth of content. So if you started now, he'd probably be working on a new season by the time you get out there.
Do you think at some point Hollywood gives him a lifetime achievement?
Oh, without a doubt.
They better.
In fact, I'm actually surprised that they haven't at this point.
Well, he's that level of celebrity who everyone knows him, right? But he's not those roles that they give those to, or he isn't a person who has those leading roles that over time they're going to, oh, Robert De Niro, here's your lifetime achievement, but he deserves it. That's an absolute lifetime achievement.
He won an award on Jimmy Kimmel's show called the Hey, I Know That Guy From Award. And so I think they put him and Danny Trejo and like 4 other guys into the audience. And they're like, and the award for best actor that you don't know the real name of goes to Ned the Head from Groundhog Day. His real name is Stephen Tobolowski. And so I think that he does, because he's worked with directors that are just amazing, and he's been in cast that includes such great people. Julie Haggerty from Airplane, he and Julie Haggerty are such good friends, and he's just, really amazing.
He's on the JJ Meets World bucket list of us we want to get him as a guest at some point. So hopefully we can get him back to town and sit down with him. That'd be great.
And you know what's nice? At the end of each one of his episodes, he gives his Gmail account.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's funny because he goes, it's Stephen Tobolowski, Tobolowsky, the Russian spelling, at gmail.com. And when I first started listening to this, I emailed him and I said, hey, your podcast is awesome, and I'd love to find a way to get you to Fargo. And he's like, yeah, let's find a way.
Awesome.
And then a couple of years later, boom, we had him.
That's awesome.
And he did a reading from his one of his upcoming podcast episodes. And then his trip here became part of a podcast episode because he talked about going to Deadwood after he had starred in the television show Deadwood.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And
he's been in everything. And
he tells like a great story in it about how like David Milch, who created Deadwood, had a rule on set that you weren't allowed to wash your costume. And so day one, he stepped in a huge pile of horse crap, and he went over to the wardrobe and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm going to need to switch these shoes and pants out. And they're like, nope. And he goes, it's like 95 degrees. And they're like, yep. And he goes, so you really get into that thing. And like the way he does auditions, he talks about just going out there, and he talks about improvising on film quite a bit. And he's just a guy who I'm fascinated with. And like I said, I love the stories he has about Hollywood, but I'm just as intrigued at the stories about being raised by a father who still did house calls as a doctor, or, he got very sick when he was younger because he was laying in he had done like a show, like a little stage show with other like sixth graders, and they had a party over at their teacher's house, and he was eating watermelon while laying on her lawn and thinking about how beautiful the day is. And she was like, don't eat anything that touches the lawn. I just sprayed for chinch bugs. And then he ended up having internal bleeding for like 4 years of his life.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so he tells like these stories, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I love the Tobolowski files. They can't be beat. They're great for long trips. You can listen to them in short spurts. I mean, just fantastic. It's almost like you're having a friend telling an interesting story, and you just get to go along for the ride.
Yeah.
What's something you've been listening to?
I've got a couple of mainstays that have been on my my RSS feed catcher for a long time. I think the first one I'm going to highlight right now is it was retitled. At first, it was called the AI Podcast, and now it's called the Lex Friedman Podcast. It's the name of the host. Lex Friedman, he's probably roughly our age, if not a little younger. He's an AI researcher, artificial intelligence researcher, and I forget what university he teaches at and stuff like that. But he started a podcast a number of years ago called the AI Podcast, where he just wanted to be able to sit down and have conversations with interesting people in the field to talk about different things about that. And his personality and style really caught on because he's this really nice, mild-mannered, kind of quiet guy, and he wears the same thing every single day. He has a uniform. He has it's a black suit and tie with a white button-up shirt. So that's most of his clothing are black suits and tie, because he's like the kind of Silicon Valley kind of dude who's like, I want to take out all the decisions I can, get rid of them all and stuff like that. So it's become kind of part of his brand now, and he has really interesting conversations, and he's genuinely incredibly curious. And because he doesn't seem to, if he has an ego, he does not display it. So he's really, really good at asking great questions and then really turning it over to the guest and listening. And like you see, because he videotapes everything too. I think it's a one-person operation. So he flies around the country with like 2 cameras on tripods and lights and a curtain, and he's got podcasting equipment, and he sets it all up himself and blah, 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 blah. And he puts a lot of work into it. And it's clearly a passion project, one that he's now doing full time, and which I find very inspiring. Like that's something I've considered trying to make happen at some point. Would be maybe if I could be like a Lex Friedman and get like an interview show where I'm traveling the country. It'd be a lot of fun. But I like him a lot, and he has a voice that's unlike other people. And when I say voice, I'm not talking about the actual sound of his voice. I'm just saying that sort of when we talk about a voice in art, that person's perspective or something that feels like it's coming uniquely from them. That's something that he has done. And he has a really fascinating histories, Russian. And the Lex Friedman Podcast, if you are someone who'd like to have something in your RSS feed, I think he's putting out at least a new episode a week. He's been pretty prolific for the past couple of years. And his episodes run at almost 2 hours at least. And there's always a YouTube version, a video version that you can watch with timestamps and everything. And so often what I'll do is I'll look at who his guest is. Oh, I like that guest. I bet they're going to be talking about this. And I'll look through the timestamps. Yep, they talk about this right here. And I'll skip to that point, depending on but depending on everything, how much time do I have to listen? How interested am I in this thing? So check out the Lex Friedman podcast, and all these podcasts that we're talking about today. You'll be able to find them wherever you find podcasts, but definitely Apple Podcasts. You're going to find them there. Probably Spotify.
So it's rare that I go behind a paywall. A podcast really has to get me and capture my attention for me to pay for it, which is horrible to say, right? Because it's like people are creating these things, and some of these podcasts people are putting thousands of dollars into,
right?
Versus like Tucker and I, where we've made small investments, but we're not getting rich off of this thing. We're using the
same microphones that we started with.
Yeah, it's covered in Cheetos dust and some cat hair. So this is a podcast I actually paid for. So I loved the first season so much that I was like, I got to continue with this. And our friend Sean turned me on to it. And it's called The Teacher's Lounge. And it's an improvised character-based podcast. And it takes place in the teacher's lounge of this middle school. And so the hosts play reoccurring characters. And so like one of them is a driver's ed teacher who does not have a driver's license currently. And one of them is like a math teacher, and their guests are other people who work in the school. So in the very first episode, the one I listened to with our buddy Sean, they had one of the gym teachers in, and the gym teacher, I mean, they talk about not necessarily like the kids, but they talk about education in general. And then in this one, they're like, we wanted to test you because we know you eat in the cafeteria every day to see if you could identify these things from the cafeteria. So we painted everything green. And he goes, yeah, well, okay. So they're like, but don't use the paint. Like, don't beyond the flavor of paint, can you identify what it is? And he was like, well, I really I'm tasting a lot of paint. But if I had to guess, this is Salisbury steak. But again, it tastes mostly like exterior house paint. And then another teacher admits that they drink paint. Like that's their thing, is they just love to do. It is so flippin' funny. And sometimes these guys break while they're getting these conversations. It is just one of the funniest podcasts I've ever listened to. And maybe it definitely tickles my fancy as like an improviser, and I can put myself into that world of where I can forgive kind of the story building aspects. And so I don't know if it's for everybody,
right? But
if you're somebody who enjoys like, what would be a good example? Like, Kids in the Hall, if you liked Strangers with Candy, if you liked Harmon Quest would be another one, I think, then this is definitely up your alley. And you can listen to a bunch of them for free, but it became super popular and they got all these sponsors. And so they put some of the seasons behind paywall, and then they got bigger sponsors who like, we want more people to listen. So we're going to take you out of the paywall, but we'll have sponsorships be a part. And the people do them in character for some of their sponsorships, which is just fantastic.
Nice.
And if I need a good laugh, the Teacher's Lounge.
Okay.
Yeah. And
it's a great premise.
And it's got one of the best opening themes too. Like whoever wrote their theme song for it is amazing. Did such a good job. And that's the beauty of some of the podcasts, is people just take a simple premise, and the podcast leans into the old style of radio so well, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's scripted entertainment. They're not meant to be factual, deep digging news stories all the time. Some of them are just meant to be entertainment.
Yeah.
And so this is one that is meant to be pure and solid entertainment, start to finish. And Tucker, I'm gonna loan you some Teacher's Lounge.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think you're going to like it took up 9 gigs once I downloaded everything on my computer. It's well worth it.
Nice.
What else are you listening to?
So the next one I want to highlight, I think might currently be defunct, but it has so many episodes in the library that there's plenty to go back and listen to. It's called Mike and Tom Eat Snacks, and it's Michael Ian Black and Tom Cavanaugh, and they became good buddies, I think, when they were working the show Ed way back in the day or something. So they became tight, and this was years ago. So this is an old podcast. This is like before podcasting really became a thing. They started this thing called Mike and Tom Eat Snacks. And the whole premise is that every episode they're going to eat a snack and review it. And so, one episode might be Oreo cookies, and then it might be nachos, and then it might be whatever. And but they go for at least 1 to 2 hours wherever they can take it, and they treat it. They call themselves professional snackologists, who are very important about it. There's a lot of emphasis on whatever they want to make it sound like it's like a really important scientific endeavor that they're going through. They got really big. People started sending them snacks, and so the show they call the show Mates. Mike and Tom Eat Snacks, and if you're listening to the show, you're a matey. And they kept me sane through a lot of long car rides because they have so many episodes out there. I don't think they're doing it anymore. I think it just kind of faded away as time went on, but they've got a ton of episodes, and they hold up because it's pretty much just they're talking about snacks and eating snacks. But they'll even, as the show goes on, it would take them 45 minutes of just bullshitting with each other before they could even get to the snack. They'd be laughing so hard. So it's definitely worth checking out. Mike and Tom Eat Snacks on the internet.
Do you remember one where they reviewed a snack and you immediately wanted to eat that snack? Do they tell you in advance so that you can prep so that you can eat it while they're eating?
It'll usually be in the title of the episode.
So like eat, like oven baked Cheetos.
Yeah. There were snacks. I can't remember the names of any now, but they were getting like snacks from different towns or cities that would be specific to that town. So I can't think of one that stands out of the top of my head, but they were definitely getting like this kind of caramel, whatever, from Maine, and it's from this particular thing or what have you. They had some snacks from Japan at one point. I think snacks from Japan are really fascinating. Candy and snacks from Japan.
You could have hours of content based off of stuff you get from Japan, because even when you go to like a KFC in Japan, it's like, oh, try our, like spaghetti. You'd be like,
right.
What?
Well, and listening to Mike and Tom Eat Snacks was the first time I was listening to a show where the show had a following that was building up around it that had its own subculture. So it had its own phrasings. Had catchphrases that they would say to each other that you would know if you were listening that's a reference to a previous episode, and those would build over time. And then when people would send in snacks, they'd write a letter to saying, this is my snack I picked up, blah, blah, blah. And there'd be all these references inside of it, which will tie into the next podcast I'm going to list. But let's fling it back to you, JJ.
Okay. So I'm a huge movie buff, right? And so I listen to a podcast called Now Playing. And these guys must have started making podcasts right when iTunes launched the word podcast, because, oh my God, their catalog goes back thousands of episodes. It's three guys. Normally it's three guys. Sometimes they swap out for a different friend. Sometimes they bring in one of their wives and they review movies.
Okay.
But they do it in a unique format where they start talking about, this is how this movie came on my radar. I remember seeing this movie. This was the, when it first came out, or this is the first time I've watched it. And then they go into a detailed plot synopsis. They go into some making of. They seek out all these aspects around the movie that they include in their review for it. So, for example, I know you're a fan of the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Mm-hmm. So it's a guilty pleasure of mine, for sure.
So when they review that, one of the things they did is all of them read John Leguizamo's Autobiography, which I guess has 2 chapters just about making this movie, and about how he and Bob Hoskins got drunk all the time. And when they were driving that car, got into like an actual accident in it. So they're incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to the making of these movies and where, these things went to. Some of them studied screenwriting. Some of them work in the industry now. And as much as I love this podcast, I disagree with these guys non-stop on their analysis of movies. And quite frankly, sometimes they are confused by the simplest plot points. So take when we did our Sonic the Hedgehog review, right? So that's what they would do. They watch a movie, and sometimes, and they're in different cities. Like, I will also say this is a podcast where they kind of tell you right away, it's being produced in 3 separate cities at the same time, well before we learned about like Zencaster and stuff. So I don't even know how they were originally doing this thing. And it sounds great. It doesn't sound like 2 of them are non-local and one of them is,
phoning in.
The quality is there. And it's weird because sometimes they bleep stuff out and sometimes they don't when it comes to like harsh language.
That could be a whole sponsor thing too. You never know.
So here's the thing. So they're not sponsored.
Okay.
they release an episode every Tuesday for free. But then what they'll do is they'll do like PBS, like they'll do like little subscriber based things. So for example, I wanted to listen to their Jurassic Park series. Well, I had to buy those all for $1.99 a piece by becoming a sponsor of theirs on Podbean.
Gotcha.
And they'll do like the entire Children of the Corn series and stuff like that. And they'll put that behind a paywall, but there'll also be free stuff all the time too. So, and they don't retire episodes. Like if you go, you can listen to 1,000 episodes, and sometimes they'll do all the James Bond movies, and it won't be every single week a James Bond movie. They'll sprinkle them in when there's no new releases coming out or something like that.
So what were they doing during COVID then?
So they caught up on a backlog of stuff that they hadn't done previously. So they started doing like movies based on video games. Gotcha. And so then they'll do stuff like the Blood Rain movies, of which there's like 4. And I'm like, I have no desire to listen to these at all. Like I remember reshelving this at Take Two Video. So here's the thing about these guys. I feel like this is like when Howard Stern was starting to get big. And they said the average Howard Stern lover listens for 3 hours. The most typical response to why is I want to hear what he says next. The most a typical Stern hater listens for 3.5 hours, and their typical response, I want to hear what he's going to say next. Right. They're the way that they are like, oh, Jurassic Park is a piece of garbage. And I only saw this movie once in 1993 when it first came out, and I really wasn't moved. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? And then they'll throw major love to a movie like Children of the Corn 5, El Zagel's Revenge, or whatever it happens to be. And I go like, I just can't believe you guys. And like I said, they get confused at simple plot points, which I clearly followed when watching like the movie. Do
you think they're Rush Limbaughing you? They're trying to just make you piss?
No, because sometimes one of them will call the other one out on it and say like, well, yeah, that's because of this. Like, well, I just didn't catch that. And so as much as I hate it, I have not only given these guys at least $100 in some of their subscriber only paywall stuff. I purchased a book that they wrote as a group called Underrated Movies We Love. And that cost $60.
Wow.
And guess what? I paid for that 4 years ago, and they've had printing trouble. And so now they're guaranteeing me it'll be here by Christmas, but who knows? They got taken by like a Chinese company, I guess, who's going to print all these books. And now I'm also profitizing for them on our podcast.
Sure.
Now here's the thing. If you're a movie lover, this is well worth listening to because you're going to get some great insight into these movies. And it is like that movie discussion that, we would have at the, snack counter of the Fargo Theater. It's the movie discussion that Tucker and I have about like, which is the best of the Star Trek movies.
Right.
Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home.
Right. We're both in agreement on that too.
In fact, just this weekend, I bought the entire Star Trek film series, including Next Generation stuff, for $40. Ooh. All 10 movies for $40.
Blu-rays or 4Ks?
I bought the digital.
Oh, got it.
Digital and download.
Gotcha.
And I started watching Voyage Home last night, and I'm like, this is really all I wanted.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I might watch a couple of the other ones, but this is the one where, like, I was excited. I'm like, whales. So this now playing is, I think, well worth it to people. Also, this is when you and I first started talking about doing a podcast, and you mentioned Patreon as a way that you can crowdfund your podcast to cover things like hosting fees, stuff like that. These guys are bringing in like $15,000 a month from their Patreon.
Nice. Good for them.
Plus their Podbean brings in a ton of money. These guys have figured out how to do stuff where you have a free version, then you've got a paywall thing. But if you're only listening to the free version, you don't feel like you're being excluded in any way.
Right.
And I think that they've just done an amazing job. They've also launched a website called Books and Nachos where they review books. And so they can self-promote, be like, well, we're reviewing Kathy Bates in Misery right now. And if you go and check out our Books and Nachos review of Misery, the book. And so it's smart.
Are they also reviewing nachos, or is that just?
I have never truly been to Books and Nachos because, listen,
I'm far more intrigued in the nacho reviews than I am the book reviews. These guys don't sound like readers to me, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. And they don't. And just sometimes you just want to punch them in the face. I swear to God. That's the thing is, I complain about this podcast more than any other, but Tuesday morning I am there, and every now and then they don't release until like Tuesday evening, and I get pissed off about it.
I wonder how many times of our listener base has thought like, I really want to punch Tucker in the face or JJ in the face. I mean, I guarantee
quite
you
a bit.
The Princess Bride in the top 5 comedies, which I knew I was going to get flack for that.
Yeah.
Which
Were you trolling people?
No, I mean,
by that?
I still love it, but I also understand why they wouldn't want it. But I also celebrate that. Like, you can't hurt me. Like, go ahead and say whatever you want. I love it. You know, I'm sort of a misanthrope when it comes to that. So go for it. But I really wonder, you know, how many times, one time my buddy James, who's been on the podcast, this was before he's on the podcast, he said that he was listening to us one morning and I had said something that he disagreed with, and he dropped his breakfast on accident, and he said, "God damn it, Tucker." And he blamed me for it.
Blamed you for it.
It wasn't even in the room. I wasn't even live, you know, and he said he's argued with me. I think Monika has told me she's argued with us, forgetting that she's just driving the car and listening to us in the car. Yeah.
Okay, so now you're up.
Well, okay, I know which one I wanted to say, but because you talked about that one, I'm going to switch gears real quick and talk about one that started as a podcast and became a YouTube series.
Oh my!
Called On Cinema at the Cinema.
Oh yes,
with
yes.
Tim Heidecker and Greg Turkington. So you probably know who Tim Heidecker is. Greg Turkington is the guy behind Neil Hamburger, the stage persona who's sort of an anti-comic. Was big in the punk music scene as well in the 80s and early 90s. Anyways, they met on the set of a movie called The Comedian, and they became buddies on that, and between takes and downtime they were commiserating, and this was early on in podcasting where podcasting was just beginning to blow up. And at that time, and it might still be the case, but at that time the vast majority, by a staggering amount, of podcasts out there were a couple of dudes sitting around giving their opinions on movies. And more often than not, they weren't actually providing anything of value whatsoever, right? It felt like lowest common denominator possible. And so they thought, let's start one of those podcasts where it's just devoid of meaningful content and we clearly don't know what we're talking about. Let's parody all these other podcasts. So they started called On Cinema at the Cinema. It used to be like 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long maybe. And their system is how many bags of popcorn does this get? And everything gets 5 bags of popcorn. Flat out, everything gets 5 bags of popcorn. Doesn't matter. A few things haven't over time, but almost always uniformly it's 5 bags of popcorn going all the way down. And they were having so much fun doing it that they did a YouTube season of them, which is where I found it for the first time and fell in love with it because we all know guys just like these two who claim to have some deep level of knowledge of, say, cinema, but then show they actually know absolutely nothing. One of the great recurring jokes on that show is that Greg Turkington thinks that he's got Wrath of Khan and Voyage Home, I think, mixed up. Or he is in staunch disagreement as to what the correct numbering order is of the Star Trek films. And every time Heidecker can go, but look right here, and he'll point it out, Turkington's able to come up with some kind of a twist on how that wasn't going to work out. And then they have the Oscar special that I watch. So when the Oscars are on, I never watch the Oscars anymore. I'm just not that interested. I don't care. But I do watch the On Cinema at the Cinema Oscar special, which is amazing. It's a lot of what might be categorized as anti-humor, which I think is a misnomer because humor is humor. But I get what they're going for, where it's part comedy, part performance art, where they're doing these long form things. And also because of their show, those are the 2 most viewed videos on my personal YouTube channel are supercuts I made from that show. So I made a supercut of all of what Greg Turkington does. He'll give it 5 bags of popcorn, and then he'll come up with some little extra thing he's going to give them based on what the movie was or whatever he's feeling that day. So I made a supercut of all of his little prizes that he gives. And then Tim Heidecker is playing a version of himself who has some kind of a learning disability or something and cannot read well, if at all. And he is the host of the show and has all these anger management issues and is adamant that he is the one who reads the card about what movies we're watching today or we're reviewing today and who's in them. But he can never pronounce names correctly, ever. So and Heidecker's really good at it. When he was a kid, I think he was dyslexic. And so he's able to kind of lean into some of that. So I made a supercut that's 35 minutes long of him just saying celebrity names, and it's got like 62,000 views right now on YouTube. And so I love them, and I love the community of people that have like that follow them, because it has its like insider language and all these things. And it's the kind of show that will never probably achieve the level of popularity where you'll see it mainstream. It's just too much of a slow burn. It's too much of a weird out there thing, but it's found the audience that really loves it and supports it. They've got reoccurring characters. They've got all these weird storylines that they've done. At one point, Tim Heidecker had a storyline where he wanted to start a festival just like the Fire Festival. And because he wanted a festival where he could hand out these vape pens he was trying to sell, and it ends up like the vape pens were toxic and killed 6 people. Okay. And so they then did a massive 4-hour production called like the Trial of Tim Heidecker. That's completely long form with improvisers playing all the lawyers. They got an actual courtroom, and they make it look like it's court TV, and you see the trial of Tim Heidecker. It's such a slow burn. I think Heidecker had said that Bob Odenkirk called him and said, "This is the greatest thing you've ever done," during the trial of Tim Heidecker. So they have, and with their show, to keep up to date on what's going on, you need to follow their Twitter accounts too, because they tweet in character, which is awesome. And they also try to make their own movies, and then they're fighting over who's getting to make the movies. So Tim Heidecker's character has created a show called Decker, which is just a shortening of his last name, who's sort of an action hero by him. And and then Greg Turkington's character's name is Kington. He's a Kington, the code breaker. And it's must-see TV for someone like me who likes weird humor, who likes the slow burn, who likes something that is unlike other stuff you're going to see, because working in media, I've seen so much of every kind of style that it's tough for me to really get excited about something until I know it's going to be chaos, and I'm not going to be sure exactly what comes out of it.
The Tim and Eric are people who, like you said, you know, the fact that they got to make that movie, Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie, is just nothing short of a miracle. And the first time I watched it, I was like, boy, this is not going to go over well with the masses, but I'm loving every minute. The long story short is these guys are given $1 billion to make a movie, and then they blow all the money. And so they decide they're going to run away, and they are going to manage a mall. And so they've got such great relationships with people like John C. Reilly and like other famous comedians. And so Will Ferrell is the guy who's in charge of hiring the mall managers. And they find his office in the basement of the mall. Do you remember this scene?
Oh, yeah.
And he's asking them questions like, do you guys like the movie Top Gun? And they're like, yeah. And he goes, let's watch it. And so he grabs a VHS tape and pops it in. And you kind of see them watching Top Gun, and it gets to the end. And he's like, yeah, this movie's great. Should we watch it again? And they're like, okay. And it's just, and the mall is overrun with wolves.
You can tell too that with the budget they had to make that on, because most of the shots are in single shots. Yeah. So clearly they had Will Ferrell for like one day. Yep.
So to me, it's if you love that absurdist style of humor, or, you know, like,
you either love it or you hate it.
Right.
There's really no in between. Like I work with someone who hates it. And so I can't really talk about it anymore around him, because he has to remind me every time I talk about how much I loved him and Eric. It's like, I really hate them. It's like, okay, thanks, man.
One of our first guests, Scotch, and I went and saw Tim and Eric live for their 10th anniversary special. Awesome. And it opens with them wearing tuxedo shirts, coats, and bow ties. But then like the tuxedo pants have been cut into short shorts, and they have top hats and canes, and they come out and they dance around the stage for 2 minutes, which turns into 5 minutes, which turns into 10 minutes, not choreographed in any way or shape or form. They're just like dancing, like, and at one point you're like, they're waiting for the audience to turn, right? Like they're going to see how many people walk out before they're willing to stop.
And that is straight up Greg Turkington's style as well. And it kills me that for the amount of times that Turkington has come to Fargo as Neil Hamburger, every time it's happened, I've had to be out of town for some reason and wasn't able to go. And the last time he was here, Heidecker opened for him.
Yeah, it was a great show.
His own stage persona that's also like an anti-comic. So
he plays like a 90s comic. So he's got like a leather jacket on, and he takes off like his wedding ring. He's like, one ring to rule them all. Am I right, guys? Oh God, my wife. Oh, and cooking airline food, right?
There's if you go on YouTube at some point, there's a great Tim Heidecker stand-up bit. He must be at a college or something, and the whole bit is that he's like a first-time comic trying to work through his act for the first time, and he's taping it at the same time, so he'll keep doing hold on, I'm gonna do that joke again, and he'll do multiple takes of the same joke. And this was around the time of the this was when Obama and Hillary were still going head-to-head in the primary, so he was trying to make jokes about Barack Obama and Hillary's Clinton, and he couldn't get names right. And he also starts the show asking for like the manager, like, I didn't get the drink tickets. So just, if you can, I was told I'd have a couple drink tickets. So if you can let me know, that'd be great. But
it's just like Neil Hamburger does his act while he's holding like 5 drinks, like different
of
drinks.
Champagne.
Yeah.
And he also clears his throat into the microphone. I have some favorite jokes that I wish I could say on this podcast. And we usually let it fly on this podcast, but it wouldn't work, and often even doesn't work in the context of Neil Hamburger for people who walk in. But for true, like diehard fans like me, you hope to see the people there who don't understand what's going on.
Right.
Because that's part of it.
Part of the gag is that you think you're going to see a comedian, and you're seeing a comedian who's playing off the fact that he's going to see how far you go. And it's not that he's going to say stuff like that is so controversial, like, like COVID's not real. He's going to have jokes where he lines it up and won't tell you the punchline. And he'll spend 7 minutes saying, why does KFC, Kentucky's #1 food source, and just like builds up. And so when you finally are supposed to get the relief, right? Like, because that's what it is. It's like he's twisting a rubber band, twisting it, and you're supposed to get this giant bout of energy with the release. And then the release is garbage, and so good.
It says like, why did Julia Roberts, famous actress, Julia Roberts, why did
Hollywood sweetheart,
beloved, Julia, and then goes on and says something horrible. You're like, whoa, where'd that come from?
The KFC punchline is one of my favorites of like, why does KFC come in a bucket? And he wants the crowd to be like, why? And he's like, are you paying attention? Why does Kentucky Fried Chicken come in a bucket? And over and over and over. And so finally, like, he's got the whole crowd going like, for the love of God, why? And he goes, so you've got something to throw up in afterwards. And you get the person who's like, I'm out. I'm gone.
And that's the best part, right?
Yep. He also does not play big theaters.
No.
He plays like bowling alley lounges.
Well, and so if you live in Fargo, he usually comes to the aquarium when he is here. It's been a while since he's been here. But he did, I want to say around 2002, 2003. And it was Steve from Videoland, R.I.P. Steve, who turned me on to Neil Hamburger in the first place. And he did a tour where he performed at a dry cleaner, at a bowling alley, I want to say a dog race track, and maybe one other spot where they did not announce a comedy show was going to be happening. So there's literally him doing jokes while someone's like putting their whites into and like counting out change to put stuff in. So he gets in front of the most hostile crowds you could possibly come up with, and then leans into the discomfort. Let's trade it back to you, JJ. It's okay. I think we can each probably get in one more here.
Okay. Another one that I like is Never Not Funny. Okay. So there's a comedian, and I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden, but I saw him at the Improv when I was in LA, and Jimmy Pardo, that's his name, okay. Jimmy Pardo. And he had this amazing ability to talk to people in the crowd, but what he'd do is he'd pick something about you, and rather than like make fun of you for it, he'd just say like, hey, Hat. All right, Hat, listen, Hat, let me ask you a question. You go to a hotel, Hat. Okay. You're going to a hotel. Maybe you're there on business. Maybe you're there on pleasure. I don't know about your life. I'm not going to tell you how to lead it, Hat. But Hat, you go. You're going to take a shower. You're feeling dirty. You want to get clean. You take a shower, Hat. How many towels are you using? And the guy's like, I don't know, like 2. And he goes, I use every goddamn one. And he goes, maybe it's because I'm not doing the laundry. Maybe it's because I want to be squeaky clean. Or maybe it's I want to get my money's worth. But I use every damn towel. And so I saw him, and there were only like 5 other people in the crowd when I saw him. And he's popped up in television and movies and like specials and stuff. And his podcast, this must be a character he does. Kind of this guy who does, this fast talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's got someone else who's like, yep, okay, great. Great. Thanks for that, engineer. You dip. And he's just constantly hilarious. And so it's fun to listen to him. And like, he's always got takes on the road. And he goes, I recently was at a convenience store, and here's the thing. You think you're going to go in there and you're going to find your favorite thing, right? But it doesn't, but you're in Tennessee and everything's backwards in Tennessee. So you go in there and you're like, I'm going to have a bear claw for breakfast. And what they got like some kind of like, like a badger's tail. I'm like, why is this called a badger's tail? It's the same thing as a bear claw. Well, you're in Tennessee. That's why. And then he goes like, Tennessee, you're part of the union. You gotta pull your weight. He goes, you get federal funding for your interstate system. And so he does a great job in just pulling things together. And I think he's pretty darn funny when it comes down to like little pieces like that. And so I get a kick out of his. I will also say that his is very similar in my mind to Larry Miller, who's another like kind of bit player comedian, who has kind of played in every man and everything he's ever done.
Right.
And they're great. These guys have kind of fallen off a little bit. Now, what's funny is all of a sudden when podcasts got big, podcast networks started to get big, right? So things like Earwolf, right? And so they gobbled up all these podcasts saying like, oh, make your podcast for our network and then we'll sell some ads and we'll get away to this. And I think it didn't become as fun anymore. We've talked about network stuff for a lot here, and the industry is still so young. We're trying to all figure out how it works, but actually my next one actually has, I think, figured it out in that they're not a network, but they're a studio that produces multiple podcasts. And so podcasts can get produced under a certain title. And then what they would typically do is like, I'm talking about Your Mom's House podcast with Tom Segura and Christina Pajitsky. So it started off as Your Mom's House, just that, which it still exists. They've been around for their 8-9 years, if not longer than that. And they're the ones that have diehard fans. I mean, these are fans. I've never, ever seen a fan base of comedians, a podcast comedians doing what these guys do. They've taken over the Garth Brooks comment section on Instagram and Facebook. It's pretty darn funny.
It's pretty hilarious, and there's so much humor to the subculture now. There's all these phrases and things that you if someone says keep them high and tight, they're Your Mom's House fan because they're talking about your jeans. Keep your jeans. If you say I wear my jeans high and tight, that means you're a fan of Your Mom's House podcasts, and they produce other stuff now too. They kept me sane through the pandemic because they were already producing so much stuff so regularly that their show really feels like you're just hanging out with a couple comedians, but it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And their shows can get up to like 3-4 hours in length sometimes. And their studio, so they have other shows. They do Two Bears, One Cave with Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer, which might be my all-time favorite right now. That's the one I listen to without fail. That's the one that gets me doubled over in my apartment, belly laughing all the time. They do Where My Mom's At, which is Christina's show, which is, it's sort of her take on parenting, but it's never just stuck to that. They've got Dr. Drew After Dark. So they brought in Dr. Drew, who now produces, basically, if you missed Loveline and you want a better version of it, listen to Dr. Drew After Dark. But on Your Mom's House, everyone on the show is a personality in some way. So the crew, they're all personalities because all of us listeners now know who like the producers are and who the camera guys are and stuff because they're always referencing them all the time. But also they do Your Mom's House live every couple of months, which I haven't had the courage to tune into yet because Tom Segura loves what I would call heavy humor, which means he really loves showing people videos of, say, injuries or, things that I wouldn't even want to mention here to get the reaction out of it. And so they always refer to the heavy segment, which if you become a subscriber of theirs, you'll get access to the heavy segments, which I do not subscribe because I don't want the heavy segments. I can't do it. But they're fantastic. And Tom and Christina, even though you can't see inside of anyone's relationship, they are the definition of relationship goals for me. The kind of humor that they have with each other, since they're both stand-up comedians, that their back and forth is fantastic. So Your Mom's House Studios is the production company. So it's not like they're not calling it a network. I mean, I guess you could say it is, right? Because they're selling ads, but each show has different kind of ownership things. So like Two Bears, One Cave, it's produced by Your Mom's House, but Bert Kreischer has a piece of that. I don't know how they divide up other things. And then what he's also done, what Segura has done, is he helped a few of his friends get their podcasts off the ground inside of Your Mom's House Studios until they were ready to go off on their own. And with his blessing, yep, go for it. And I don't know if there's any kind of a profit sharing deal on the back end there or anything like that. But, he as a producer, because he's the one in charge of really the main business, he really understands the, rising tide raises all boats kind of a thing, and has built around their organization this fantastic community of people that's going to keep it going forever. And it also kept them in an amazing income during COVID, because 99% of the stand-up comedians, you just couldn't do it anymore, right? But if you had a podcast that was going really well, you could actually earn some income, and that's how they pay for everything.
One of the things that
They're millionaires
that I like too is a podcast allows you to interact in almost real time with your fans, right? So it's incredibly topical. And if you're smart, you create stuff that's evergreen, but can be and for those of you who don't know, evergreen is stuff that can be enjoyed today or 5 years from now and not have.
Yeah. So we're not going to be like, that Bill Clinton really done Monica Lewinsky wrong, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to be, and what unfortunately is there's a whole, year and a half now of content where people are constantly talking about COVID-19,
including us.
Yep. So,
but you talk about what's going on.
Yeah. Will that age well? I don't know. We'll have to find out.
It's an interesting time capsule, though, if you think about it. Like, imagine what we would have access to if podcasting existed during World War II, right? Yeah. The people at home talking about the struggles of their lives and stuff. Even if it's not topical, it's still interesting to go back to. I also just love the fact that, you shouldn't be making podcasts in a rush necessarily. It's a slower format, so you can listen to it. It's not 24-hour news networks with sound bites. It's not late night TV shows that give you 5 minutes of surface level conversation with a celebrity that you might not even know the name of or care about.
To me, podcasts are like what the Tonight Show used to be like in the 70s and 80s, where you didn't necessarily like. Nowadays, a guest comes on because they've got something to promote, right? Like, I got a book coming out or my latest album drops on this day. But it used to be that celebrities would just stop by when they didn't have anything to promote. Like,
Buddy Hackett's on again today,
Exactly. Funny you say that, because I love that episode where he tells the duck jokes.
Yep.
Like all the farm theme jokes. They're so good. And so to me, that's close to what podcasts are, right? Like, where you can have conversations that are just as great now as they were then. That's one of the reasons I like the Now Playing podcast or a Tobolowski's podcast. So in fact, let's break it down again real quick so that everyone can get this, because if they're listening to this in different stints, like if they're like our friend Natalie, who's listening to this as she commutes back and forth.
Hey, Deutschmark.
The Tobolowski Files is my first one. Love the Tobolowski Files. Teacher's Lounge and Now Playing.
Always funny.
And never not funny.
Never not funny. Mine was the Lex Friedman podcast, and then I said Mike and Tom Eat Snacks, and then it was On Cinema at the Cinema, which is primarily a YouTube show now, but started as a podcast. And then I ended with Your Mom's House podcast studios. A quick shout out though to the Savage Love podcast with Dan Savage is another one that I would have putting in there if we had more time. There's actually more that we could even do a part 2 in this. Maybe
because I know
part 2.
You're a huge Joe Rogan fan too. Like you loved his stuff when it was you loved his stuff before it became ultra popular.
Yeah, he was doing something different at the time where it was so low tech and low key, and there was no sponsorships and nothing. It was just you felt like you had a direct access and you were hanging out with people. I listened to him sparingly because he is a personality. Sometimes I like him and sometimes I can't stand him. And he is someone too where he's so curious about talking to anyone that he'll have guests on that I'm super interested in, or guests that I just don't even want to listen to. So I just don't listen to them. But he is the gold standard, is that he's the first person to get like a 7 or 8 figure deal.
Yeah.
From a like he doesn't need Spotify. Spotify needs him kind of a thing, So he is proof that, and the myriad of podcasts that have come since him. I mean, you don't get Your Mom's House if you don't have Joe Rogan. You don't get Uncle Joey's joint if you don't have Joe Rogan. You don't get The Honeydew if you don't have Joe Rogan. You just don't.
What was the one that, like, right when we started this podcast, where it's like let's kick this fire or whatever.
That's Uncle Joey Diaz. He said, let's kick this motherfucking mule, Lee, because Lee was his producer. What was that show called? Now he moved from California to New Jersey. Now it's called Uncle Joey's Joint. Oh, it was the It was the Church of What's Happening Now. That's what it was called. This is the Church of What's Happening Now. And he clearly didn't understand things like music rights and stuff because he was just playing like any song he wanted as the intro. That has since changed. But he was also constantly taking bong rips during it. And no matter what, it was always like you were in some cloudy, seedy basement where people are just getting stoned and drunk all the time.
Also, any of the Dak Shepard armchair experts before he hit Spotify.
Oh, okay. I haven't listened to an episode yet.
It's good. Listen to the Will Ferrell episode. Okay. Like it's really well worth your time. So good.
Well,
good
JJ, you have a movie you need to get to.
I do. I got to get to this movie. Bye, everybody. Happy listening. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. I wish that there's a podcast called Just for While You're on the Toilet. And they're quick, 2-minute long, and that way you know if the episode's ended, you've spent too much time and you might get a hemorrhoid.